Hi, Jess.
Hi,
Jessica
Guido.
Block, a champ, one of my favourite people in the whole world.
Well, it's mutual.
Yeah, it's great. Listen, we want to just talk a little bit about our tremendous, relationship through the ACO, mainly through the ACO, although we did meet and we were just arguing about when we actually met, and I have this sort of feeling I met you when you were still at Bell Shakespeare, and then eventually you moved across to the Sydney Festival, and it was from the festival that I managed somehow to get your attention and interest in coming and joining the ACO, which was a really fundamental change for the organisation, I have to say. Personally, I think you've made a huge, huge impact and difference to what is now the Australian Chamber Orchestra.
Well, it's been such a joy doing it. And in fact, I remember clearly that night that we had dinner, Ari and you and Michelle and me, and it was around an ACO concert because we had dinner at the Park Hyatt, do you remember? And then we caught a water taxi across to the concert. So I think it's fitting that we're talking now and remembering that very first meeting. And you're right, I was at Bell Shakespeare and then I went to Sydney Festival, and I remember when you called me and said, come and work for us, and then followed a conversation with Bill Gillespie and you, and then you created this role of Deputy General Manager, where I've been ever since. And I think it's been an incredibly interesting journey with you, from a $750,000 deficit to a $15 million reserve. And a huge part of that, I think, has been, for me anyway, of course, the music and the musicians and the management, but a really big part of that has been working with you with the support of Transfield.
Thanks, Jess. Well, it's been an amazing story, and I think the vitality that Richard has brought to the orchestra as director, and really an interesting, I think I've mentioned this to you sometime in the past, a really interesting challenge he sent to me, or threw down the gauntlet, if you like, was when we were in deficit. We were talking about the whole balance of how do we actually get out of this situation, and he was a bit cranky with the situation that he was still playing at a world-class level on the stage, and yet we had all these problems with the administration and the board. If you might remember, we had to do quite a lot of changes at the board level, and Richard said to me, we play at a world-class level, I really expect that the management and the board should match us. And that was a big wake-up call for me in many ways. I mean, I was already working towards trying to do something, but I didn't have that sort of focus, that crisp focus, said in so many words by Richard. And I think that spurred me and then all the other people that have been part of the great story of building the orchestra, yourself and Bill Gillespie at the time, but then also the board that we put in place, which I think has been a big part of the corporate governance side of it, to getting it right, and then all the philanthropy, in the engagement that you set up with the various benefactors and donors to the ACO was critical in us just finally getting the appropriate amount of support that the orchestra really deserved. They absolutely deserved it, but we just had to get it in a shape where people could see it and wanted to be part of it. So it was a very exciting journey, that one, when I became chairman in about 2000, 2001. So it's been a long time now, 15 years.
And do you remember how desperation drove great ideas? Do you remember that strategic planning day where we really were desperate for ideas, and your Chairman's Council was born of that, and that's been one of the most successful things we've done, that brought individuals and corporations into this exclusive network, and almost nobody ever leaves because it's grown into something so elegant and pleasurable to be a part of, where business is done, but it doesn't look like it's being done, and all of the events are around this great orchestra, so it's a pleasure to be there. But I think I was thinking of something you said the other day, when you said in an email to me, remember, Jess, I'm just a simple engineer. And I've heard it said that the world's divided into engineers and poets, and you might say that you're an engineer and I would probably be at the poet end of the spectrum. But it seems to me that you are an engineer with the soul of a poet, because you bring to this role as chairman of the orchestra a poet's sensibility, but with the rigour of an engineer, which makes you the chairman that you are, and keeps that incredibly rigorous procedure and that rigorous process going with the board, while you still maintain this ideas-driven sensibility and this wonderful rapport with the musicians.
Thanks, Jess. That's very kind of you. And well, I just do my bit, you know. And a lot of people, you know, when you look at people who are successful, even Richard, they make it look effortless, and they actually don't really fuss about that strength that they've got. So I suppose, for my part, you know, my organisational strength and the way to actually bring people together and, you know, find the right team, if you like, and build that team is something that I really don't. It's just a natural thing. I don't really think about it being a great skill, but it's one of the things that's obviously contributed. So that's great, and it's great for the orchestra, and it's been just a lot of fun. I mean, I've enjoyed it. I've got to say, the most incredible moments of my music listening ever have been with the ACO, particularly the Huntington Estate. I remember those beautiful concerts up there with that intensity of focus of those musicians for those few days, where those concerts were really not only amazing, but, you know, hugely hard work to prepare for. I mean, there was a lot of music played in 5 days. And so some of the most sublime music moments, I think, some of the great pieces played in that wonderful winery at Huntington Estate. You know, those are the things that you can't ever either try to replicate, or, you know, just having been there at that moment is just one of those incredible moments in one's lives. And I think you would probably share some of those moments with me. And then all the other places that we played in Maribor and, you know, Carnegie Hall and all these other things where the orchestra's just, you know, really stood up and shone in such a way that it's, you know, brought about those tremendous headlines. Yeah, this must be the greatest orchestra on earth, which was the one that said that.
The Guardian.
The Guardian. I mean,
yeah.
How can you ask for a better...
Although I think The Guardian said, if there's a better chamber orchestra on earth, I haven't heard it.
That's it. Well,
but I think what made Huntington so special was the very earthiness of Bob and Wendy Roberts, combined with the sublime quality of the music. And I think that's what makes this orchestra, in many ways, so special, is that Richard Tognatti may be the greatest violinist in this country, but he's also a surfing person who is a really interesting person to know, but who maintains his connection with the land and the surf and the sea and the country, so that you get this lovely combination of the earth and the sky, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation of Richard. Richard is not a simple person at all. He's a very complex individual, because he's, you know, highly intelligent and highly articulate. But when you meet him, you feel like you've just met somebody on the street. You know, an Australian. There's a very broad Australian accent. You know, engaged in all the things around in politics and one thing and another. So you don't realise you're talking to really one of the great musicians in the world, not just in Australia. But then when he's on the stage and when he's directing, then you just see this extraordinary transformation of focus and discipline.
Although I think there's a kind of hypnotic, there's a charismatic quality about him that's almost hypnotic. We've all seen what he can do with grown men who, you know, face all kinds of extremely challenging situations in business, melt at the sight of his plea, you know. No one's immune.
No, that's right, exactly. Not even us.
Yeah.
But look, just turning back to Transfield, I think, you know, what my brother Luca has kindly, you know, assisted in supporting the ACO. So, you know, we've put our brand against the ACO over many years. I think we must be now a national tour sponsor for at least 7 or 8 years, probably longer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, that goes back a long time. And that was really not because Transfield needed to get more brand awareness or trying to communicate directly with its market. It was a sense of feeling that, you know, let's do something more. And, you know, Luca's been part of that as my partner in Transfield for many years. In fact, even in the beginning of it, when my father was still alive, actually, I come to think of it. But Dad was not a musical person. My mother was, but my father really, visual arts was his thing. Not he'd go to the opera and fall asleep. You know, a few times I saw him there, not often. But for some reason, I think the genetic distribution of an interest in music certainly came from my mother's side, and that then was supported by Transfield. Well, we had our involvement, of course, with the Biennale and the arts in different areas, the Sculpture by the Sea, where Luca, particularly Luca, was focused on the Biennale for many years. But I think that the idea that Transfield connect with the ACO in that way in the national sponsorship was quite a proud moment for me to actually realise that we were supporting the orchestra in that way and giving it further capacity to extend and conquer this sort of national tour program, which was always difficult when you think about it, because trying to get sponsors for each one of those programs is not easy, and so we were happy to be able to help where we could.
Well, you did a wonderful thing, and you are still doing a wonderful thing, and I think it's interesting when you look back at the way things progressed, because Transfield began as an associate tour partner, then we added the Chairman's Council membership, then we added a private performance here and there, and then that grew into a national tour partnership, which has, as you say, helped us keep our brand out there and be able to plan with some certainty around the national touring program. But then when the foundation came into the picture, always with Luca's wonderful support, we then had your support for all kinds of visionary ideas. I think you yourself personally have always been a huge supporter of ACO Collective, which was ACO2, and the Emerging Artists Program. So you've really helped us grow that. You've helped us develop ACO Virtual. I think you have led a board which has a real sense of informed risk-taking, I guess, if you like, that you help us take risks and you help us take the kernels of great ideas and develop them to fruition in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else in any arts company.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I feel a little perplexed to think that you can point directly at me, but I feel it's really a team effort. The board that we've put together, where we've got very deep deep capability in so many areas, whether it's organisational behaviour, whether it's finance, whether it's accounting, whether it's law or whatever. This mixture of strengths at the board has allowed me to feel confident to throw the challenge at the board, knowing that we had something really interesting like ACO2, now Collective, the instrument fund. That's a classic example of one where a very complex structure, financial and legal structure to put together, and throwing this at the board and sort of mulling over it for some months, and then finally finding both the structure of it and having the confidence to go out and launch these things. I felt that the board would be a very wise counsel, and what I feel, because I'm generally impetuous in my nature, I really felt the great benefit of having a board that was much more cautious to test ideas, because I didn't want to throw things at them that would then come apart because we hadn't thought through all of the issues. So that's the sort of team that we've brought up together. And also we've seen with the various management, first with Bill Gillespie, I think it was the first really truly professional manager, then followed of course by Tim Callanan and yourself, and all the work you did behind the scenes as a lawyer. You've contributed as well, Jess. I think, again, like me, you don't really think about that because it's part of your training, but really when you approach everything in the philanthropic area and all the various structures that we've been developing at the ACO, you bring your professional capability into this, which has been extremely useful. So I think it's just a great team effort, and for me, I'm always sort of the nightmare is what happens if the team breaks up, and so I think to counter that, let's make sure that we keep it so interesting that everybody wants to be a part of it always. This is the way to actually keep it going, and I think this is the other thing that's giving me always the energy to keep pushing these challenges. So most of the challenges, most of the ideas are not mine. I don't want to take credit for the idea per se, because wherever they've hatched from, the issue is actually letting the idea blossom. And so throwing the idea into the ring and then testing it is the thing that I think I'm good at, and just not letting up easily. If people think, oh, it's a bit too hard, well, that's not a good enough excuse, frankly.
No, but also you don't impose your own view from the beginning. I think you do exactly that. You throw the idea into the ring. You've built a really eclectic group of people around the board, around that table, and you encourage people to express their own views, and you lead very subtly. I've watched you do it where you may be impetuous by nature, but you don't let that show around the boardroom table. You let people express their ideas, you let the idea come to fruition, and then you might weigh in with your ideas. So you'll keep it going, but you don't come in at the beginning in a didactic sort of way, which I think is how people all feel that they have some degree of buy-in. And the Instrument Fund is a very good example of that, as is the education program. I remember coming to the board, to you first and then the board, to say, if I can fund this, will you let me start an education program? And there was some resistance to it from various people, but you were always a champion of it, and then others joined you. And I guess once it was funded, then what's not to like? And then that's grown into something that you've always very strongly supported, and I've been very grateful for. And I've been equally grateful for the direct access that I've always had to you and other members of the board. I haven't had to sort of direct comments or suggestions through Bill and then Tim. I can come straight to you, and I've always really valued that input, as I have valued what you have taught me along the way and what I've learned about management from you along the way. So, for example, when there have been difficult issues with musicians, you've given me very, very good advice that I've always borne in mind. You've given me a real sense of how to balance up competing considerations in order to come to a really sensible, informed, balanced result.
Oh, that's interesting that you say that, and thanks for those comments. But, you know, I again, having had a very long career in engineering with lots of people, you know, you actually see lots of situations, and so that gives a basis for actually an experience base to draw from. So that's I'm very happy to hear that, because I'm ecstatic in many ways that you know I've been able to pass some of that learning on.
But I think the same applies with the musicians. I've watched you lead a meeting with the entire orchestra where you have really listened to what they have to say before you suggest solutions. And I think a lot of other people might just weigh in and attempt to lead the situation early, whereas by allowing people to express their views, you come to a much better result.
I think you're right. But this comes back also to a pet hate of mine, and that's politics within organisations. I absolutely hate it. And I'll go to the furthest arm to actually make sure we can break it down. And in fact, really, if there are organisations where politics is so rife you can't break through it, I don't want to have anything to do with it, because it's so destructive of you know, and so consuming of energy to deal with it, which is not focused on what actually we're there for. You know, I remember thinking, and this is probably the best example in my career, there was a period, what I call almost a golden period in engineering. It was probably in the mid to late 90s, where alliancing was a big thing. There were quite a few visionary government, public sector people who were looking to join with similarly guided people in the private sector who would like to join together as a team to actually build a project for the benefit of the project, not for the benefit of the customer and not for the benefit of the contractor, but actually what was the best thing for the project in the end. So we did a number of these. It was called alliancing, and it really broke down. The way we set these places up was that we would have a project office, and you'd walk into the project office and you had no idea, in this case, whether it was a Sydney Water or a Transfield or a consultant or a finance advisor. Everybody was just mixed in this one single office space, working on how do we actually make sure this project is done on time, is done on budget, is done with the right technical solution and whatever. And the motivations and the structures of commercial structures were much simpler. So the documentation was, you know, like a tenth of what the documentation would be in a typically similar sized project that would just be sent out to tender. So full circle, this idea of alliancing, which really breaks politics down completely, because anybody who can't work within that environment is moved out.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because certain words rise to the surface in the business world. Do you remember for a while it was all about momentum? You know, did you have momentum? Then it became flow. Is there flow? Now it seems to be alignment. And there's no point working with people who aren't fundamentally aligned. So obviously that process weeded out those people who were unaligned and kept together those who were going to work well together. But I think if I can comment on something else, and that is the amazing, the ability that Transfield has given us to be able to plan with some certainty. And I remember coming to see you early on in my time at the ACO when Transfield was on a year-to-year term.
A 3-year term.
And persuading you to change to a 3-year term. And I remember you saying, do you remember that you said, you remind me of the definition of a diplomat. You send people to hell, but you make them feel like they had a good time going there.
That's right. Well, that's you. That's Jessica Block. The ultimate diplomat.
Thanks very much. But I think truly that's made a huge difference to be able to plan with some degree of certainty, to know that this orchestra will be able to keep going next year and the following year, which is in such stark contrast to the way things, the bad old years when you were first on the board.
That concept that you led, Jess, was really, really critical for getting both traction and also having predictability about what the orchestra was trying to do. So if we did anything to help in actually achieving that, is agreeing the 3-year term, that you could go and sort of in a sense lead, here's one sponsor who was prepared to do it, you could then go to other sponsors and say, well look, Transfield have done that, will you join? You know, and that, hopefully I'm sure that's what you did do, was so important in the way we actually build our budgets, because you know now we've got the 3-year terms and they don't all come off at the same time, so you get these rolling over and lapping years, which allows from a financial point of view a lot more stability and planning. I think that's critical.
But I think it's also about the way that you support all of our projects. So you and Michelle will come to a fundraiser, you'll be at the table right at the front, and when it comes time to ask for donations, up goes your hand, which means that others follow. You'll encourage other board members to support events, encourage other board members to give where you have given, and I'm sure that that will apply when we start to raise capital funds for our new home. So I think that that's not to be underestimated, and you know as well as I do that there are so many arts companies filled with board members who just leave all of this to the development team. And it makes a vast amount of difference to have you there front and centre and encouraging others to do the same.
Thanks, Jess. But I think you're right, and I'll take that compliment, but I think it's followed by a lot of other people, and also your own energy to engage both the board and all of our benefactors in so many different ways, and getting them excited about all the various possibilities. And that's a hard job. I mean, I've seen you sort of slog away at it, because you've just got to be persistent. You can't just rest on one phone call. That's just not enough. You've got to keep going back, and your capacity to actually stay focused on the target, if you like, is really important. But you know, wherever I can to help in leading that, and others that do the same, that's great, because I think it is a lot of this sort of support is based upon other people showing leadership. But we've got to have the right product, you know, and this is where I think the ACO has been extremely clever in actually developing a variety of products. I mean, you think about it, when we both joined the orchestra, and I before you, 96, 95 is when I started, we just had the simple 17 members of the main stage orchestra playing a national tour, and that's about it. They went around the country, and they do occasionally overseas tours. I mean, look what we have now. We've got ACO Collective, which came out of the Emerging Artists program, which then has led and helped us in the education program. It's, you know, with the ACO Virtual, the Instrument Fund, you know, now the Underground, ACO Next. I mean, and there will be many others. I think I've got most of them, but you know, you think about all those different arms now that have been created, and they're actually appealing to different audiences and different categories of people. And one of the great things that if we can do this at the ACO with the education program which you led, really get out there and make a difference where we can. I mean, we can't clearly, we'll never be il sistema, you know, as they have in Argentina, Venezuela, or wherever it is, that wonderful music, you know, education program, because I don't think our government and country will support what's necessary to actually get music into every school in such an organised way. But leaving that aside, whatever we can do in our way is so important to actually get immediately access to the kids that will then turn into the musicians or the audience of the future. You know, that's what we're doing there. And then, you know, we're able to bring to them through the education program, you know, the emerging artists, and then the ACO collective, where there's a place where the really talented musicians can come and play, and we've demonstrated that they can have a vision as a child going into ANAM or something similar, and then coming into the ACO through collective, and then going onto the main stage. We've shown that that whole program can work, and that's, I have to say, a very satisfying thing to watch as a board member that's now had enough time to actually see it from its very beginning to now, where it's actually happening on a regular basis.
And I think it's really important that we're seen to be a really clear voice in favour of music education, because someone was telling me, her daughter's at Ascombe, that violin is compulsory for these little girls who are 10, 11, 12. Imagine if that was the case in every school in the country. Imagine the difference you'd see in learning, in ability, in focus, in teamwork, and so on. So I do think it's a wonderful thing that we've chosen to apply ourselves to reach disadvantaged kids and to really focus on bringing music to people who wouldn't otherwise have access, rather than focusing on the private schools.
Oh, they could, but they've often got their own programs. I mean, grammar, my kids went to grammar, and everybody had to play an instrument, which is great.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be great if that was everywhere? But I think we've done a very good thing, and I think a very careful and measured thing in setting up an education program that's targeted to a different niche from those being reached by other orchestras. So, no, it's very exciting. And I think in the end, you know, Tim Calnan says, I don't hear the word no until it's yelled at me. And I think that's,
a really nice way to say that.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a kind of relentless charm, perhaps. Well, I like to think of it that way anyway. But I think the point is that I do believe 100% in this orchestra. I think they are extraordinary. I haven't ever stopped believing that, whatever happens. So it's wonderful that every one of these portals, whether it's the virtual or ACO Collective or the education program or the national tours or the international tours, all lead you to the centre of this great orchestra, which never compromises, never dumbs itself down. And I think that's a really special and very rare thing.
Yeah, it is. And we continue to help that orchestra reach new horizons by giving it access to, and through our various benefactors and donors, they let our musicians play some of the best instruments in the world. So we've got Stradivari, we've got Guadagnini, you know, Del Gesù, you know, Venholm, what's the French makers? Viom. Yeah. What's the one that Dasalo, you know, Gaspar Dasalo. I mean, these are. What would you do to actually, as an orchestra, try to get your hands on these? And yet we've got 8 or 9 of these instruments now being played by our musicians, as some of them in our own instrument fund, but a lot of them now being bought by collectors who then allow the ACO to play it. I mean, that's just a wonderful, wonderful situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jess, I think probably let's talk a little bit about the journey of trying to find a home for the ACO. We've been in the toaster, as they call it, in Circular Quay for almost 20 years now, and that was a relatively peppercorn rent, but the actual location wasn't ideal. It was all underground. People have found it very difficult to work in that environment. We have a small rehearsal place and offices, but it is completely with no natural light. And so we have to move out because that owner is going to close down that option for us in 2019. So for some time we've been looking at other alternatives, and we continue to do so, and the possibility of having a home down here at Walsh Bay is very exciting for me personally, because of the work that Transfield did with Mirvac to do the whole redevelopment of this precinct. And of course one of the things that we did as a partnership, Mirvac and Transfield, was to not only redevelop, but in fact we're in one of the apartments that is part of that here at the end of Pier 6-7. But Pier 2-3 we had returned to its original state. We'd repaired all of the pylons, and the master planning that the government agreed to included Pier 2-3 to be dedicated to arts activities, and therefore complete the arts precinct with Pier 4-5, which was not part of the Mirvac Transfield development, but would be connected to, if you like, Pier 2-3. So we've been talking for some time, and I remember putting my first proposal to the government, which was a Labor government, I think Carr was still in power, in 1998. So, you know, we're talking about getting close on 20 years ago when this first idea of having a home in this area. Now, whether it's Pier 2-3 or somewhere else at Walsh Bay, it would be a wonderful place to actually have this orchestra reside, because it sort of fits with all of the sort of angles, you know, consolidated arts precinct, have one of the great orchestras of Australia in a place right next door to STC, which is, you know, obviously an Australian renowned theatre company and the world as well, and then mix it up with all of the others, Bangara and ATYP and you know, all the other various arts companies that are there. So it would be a very nice thing to conclude that, and I think there's a lot of work going on, but whether we finally get there is the chapter yet to unfold.
Yes, and I think it's important that it be an iconic location for this iconic orchestra, but that it also be, wherever it is, a place with a music space, with a performance space, where we can have small concerts and education workshops, and maybe a nightclub format where ACO Underground can perform regularly, with a bar, so that we loosen up the traditional constraints around classical music and bring people in a way that suits them, so that we can have little kids in the music and art program in one part of the space, and we can have older kids rehearsing youth orchestra somewhere else. Later that night there's a private concert, and then there's a concert with ACO Underground and a rock musician in the pub later. It'd be fantastic to turn it into almost a 24-hour music facility, a bit like the Knitting Factory in New York. And I know, and we both know, that that's going to take a big amount of money, and I know that you've expressed support in principle to it, and I think it's going to be really exciting to bring individuals in to support this and to put their names to something that is going to be such an exciting new home and a new stage for this orchestra to reach.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the vision is quite incredible when you actually focus on it. If we can have these performance spaces that you talk about, particularly with a 300 to 500 seat place where we actually control it at the orchestra, and then can put on our own small performances, and have this space convert in opening up to the harbour when it's not closed in for a music performance. It would just be really a unique place in the world, probably, and certainly in Sydney, with the backdrop of the our wonderful coat hanger, the Harbour Bridge, and the waters of Port Junction. So, you know, hopefully we'll get there. That's the next chapter we're working on. So we'll have to come back for a sequel in this, in this interview.
Same time next year.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So, Jess, I think we wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about my mother's engagement with this orchestra, which has been, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, my interest in music really largely came from Mum, and she was the one who encouraged me to actually start playing the classical guitar back at school. So I was a relatively late comer to playing an instrument at 15. I thought that was quite a late age when you're at school. But you know, I loved music very much. But my mother really was the person who always wanted to listen to music, and had beautiful music at home, and would go to the opera and the symphony and whatever. So with that, she then, in her later years, started becoming very engaged with the ACO when I demonstrated my interest and involvement, and loved it, and loved Richard, and would always want to go to all the key performances, which she did, but of course in her later years she's a bit frail, so not as easy to get out. But Richard still does play for her every year, at least once or twice a year, and which is great. But Mum has been a wonderful supporter of the ACO and what I've been doing at the ACO.
Well, your mother's been wonderful. She really has. It's always such a joy to see her come to concerts. She's so elegant and so conversible. She's such good company, and she's always so thrilled to be there. But she's been so generous with the way that she is so unassuming about her generous support of the orchestra, the way she'll hand Richard personally a cheque every year. And it's been a real privilege for us making her our patron of the Medici program, because you know that we see your family as the Medici family of Australia, basically. And of course, she's very much a part of that. So the way she's supported the Medici program, our education program, and in latter years, the Instrument Fund, has been really exemplary, I think. And I can see where this comes to you from. And I hope that it continues through into your sons, because it's a great legacy that they have behind them of philanthropy, of visionary support for the arts. And I think most importantly, it's in a way that is incredibly unassuming and very much behind the scenes, very graceful and gracious. So I hope she knows just how much we appreciate what she does for us.
I think she does, there's no doubt about it. And she's thrilled just to be engaged with the ACO, and she really loves Richard, and Richard has just a wonderful, warm relationship with my mum, which is great, and I think that's part of the reason why it's been such a successful relationship for so many years. But you're right, you know, the point you make about the engagement with philanthropy for the next generation. I mean, I got that because in many ways my father was a great philanthropist, but he would often entertain artists and various other people at our home in the office. And so I grew up in this environment, and didn't everybody have that? I mean, of course they didn't, but for me that was a normal thing. So my understanding of the arts and seeing artists, I never got sort of thrown by the fact that they were artists, because when you meet an artist, they're just normal people, but they have a great skill. But when you talk to them, they just talk to you about all the sort of things that you talk about in life, which is great.
Sure.
So you know that capacity to pass that that way of easy dealing with the arts community came to me and my brothers, and we're trying to teach our own children the same sort of thing. So they're exposed to the arts, and I know Massimo went over and did the Reef filming with Richard in Western Australia, and formed a wonderful relationship with Richard. I think Massimo is definitely one of Richard's favourite people, because every time I see them get together, they just yep.
Yes, I've seen it myself. And then on the subject of important women, Michelle herself is an artist. Yeah. And I think it's just wonderful the way that she has become more and more involved in her own life as an artist, but she's continued to support the orchestra and to come to concerts and events with you often. And so I think it is just really special that every single one of your family, Michelle, your mum, Luca, the boys, everybody's involved, and that's a rare thing. So thank you.
No problem. But I should add, actually, you mentioned here, and I haven't actually said this anywhere before, but you know, Michelle has been a critical part of my own support of the ACO, because she supported me in all the difficult times we had when we had to rebuild the company. And then, of course, you know, the ACO's performances and the role as a chairman going to a number of things and taking a huge amount of time, which I enjoy, but really interferes, if you like, in her own life. She has actually embraced that and gone with it. So that's been very important behind the scenes support for me. So I don't feel any tension at all on our personal front about our support for the ACO. In fact, quite the contrary. You know, the idea that what else can we do, which is great. And we're getting even the point where her own interest in philanthropy through the Australian Wildlife Conservancy and the connection with the ACO, which just happened the other night. So Michelle's role as a board member at the AWC is also swinging across to engage the ACO. So that's great too. So anyway, thanks for those comments. And, we haven't gone into a huge amount of detail on that philanthropy chapter, which Jess has really led you know, with huge vigour and enthusiasm to be a key element I think I said that, but maybe, you know, I could say a bit more on it, because that part of it has actually helped us get the surplus that we have. You know, it's.
Well, I suppose it maybe just ties in, because when I arrived, the development target was 1 million. Now it's 5, and that reflects the increased activities that we're now engaged in. And I think it's been wonderful to see the growth of particularly philanthropy alongside the corporate sponsors we've had for many years, like the Commonwealth Bank and BNP. But I think what I have found most rewarding are the individual patrons, because that's where you see people who are simply thrilled to support this orchestra, who get a huge kick out of being a Medici patron or a Chairman's Council member, who love what we're doing with education, who will, I think, support what we're doing with the capital campaign when we move homes. So I think it's been really wonderful to work on those many different fronts, and it is challenging, but I have a great team around me and great support from the orchestra. So I really just want to say a huge thank you to you personally, to Transfield Holdings, to Transfield Services, the Transfield Foundation, to all the supporters within Transfield as well, who've given us such strong advice and assistance over the years.
Thanks, Jess. That's very generous of you, and you know, we've done our bit because, as much as anything else, because we've loved to do it. You know, we haven't been forced to, and it's a worthwhile cause. It is arts, and you know, arts is often very hard to fund, but in this case, we've got such a wonderful leader with Richard, and it's been a pleasure. And having you part of this team, for me, has been absolutely one of the main reasons I've still been so enthusiastic about the orchestra, because your engagement is just very special, and without it I don't think we would have achieved certainly the surpluses that we have now, but also the capacity to actually extend the various platforms that we've talked about before. So Jess, without you it wouldn't be the ACO.
Well, thank you so much, and long may it continue.
Yeah, good.